All right, it's 6 o'clock, everyone. So let's get started. Welcome to the Social Dignity Webcast. My name is Jordan Bronstein with HCCR. This is sponsored by HCCR. We're your partners on the ground in Japan who can help source, select, and place the best available talent for your organization. And I'm joined by an expert group of advisors, really fantastic panel, which I'm proud to present. And I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But first, wanted to introduce why we're putting together the Social Dignity Webcast to begin with. So obviously we're faced with unprecedented times right now, and things are uncertain. But the one thing that I know for sure is that love, life, and business will continue. And in the meantime, we need collective wisdom now more than ever to skill up, pivot, and skate to where the puck is heading. So when I reached out to these panelists, they all jumped at the opportunity to do this. And we're really excited to help global business leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, and other advisors to follow best practices in growing a Japan business, which is the title of this episode. So without further ado, let's meet our experts. Andrew Lindquist is Managing Director of Tricor Group. He's based here in the Bay Area. Andrew spent a lot of his time managing international businesses. He's a very worldly man who has lived in the UK, Hong Kong, as well as Tokyo. Today, he helps his clients expand and operate internationally with entity setup, corporate compliance, tax, and accounting matters. And Andrew, it's great to have you this evening with us.
Thanks, Jordan.
Next, David Case, who is an international attorney at Asia Pacific Law. David has not one, but 4 certifications to practice law in Oregon, Washington, California, and New York. He's lived all around the world, and most importantly in New Rochelle, which is my hometown. He's worked at global law firms White & Case and Orrick. He's got a ton of expertise in cross-border intellectual property, VC transactions, revenue share agreements, and so on. And he's fluent in Japanese and English. And David, we're really happy to have you with us tonight. Our man on the ground in Tokyo, Jonathan Epstein. Ohayou gozaimasu to you, Jonathan. Jonathan is general manager at Cornerstone On Demand, where a company that is a software that helps recruit, train, and manage their people. He also is an angel investor at companies like MoneyTree, PlusAmp, Cloudian, and Guidewire. And Jonathan has a lot of expertise in government matters, helping set up procurement licenses and payment licenses and any other regulator relations in times of crisis. Jonathan is a good guy to have on your speed dial. Last but not least, Eugene Sabori. We're really excited to have Eugene with us from Seattle. Eugene is currently co-founder of GeoFusion, which is an advisory firm helping companies enter Japan and China. He formerly is a country manager at Adobe, and before that, Microsoft. Eugene has a lot of hands-on operational experience, which really helps companies not only survive, but thrive in the Japan climate. And Eugene, again, we're really happy to have you with us tonight. So I'm going to quickly go through our rules and just make sure that everyone is really clear. So this is a trivia format, and we're going to limit the first 4 rounds to 60 seconds per answer. And there's going to be 4 categories, and each expert has their own niche. The final round is going to be more open, where we cover Q&A. And really the unique thing about the best practices in Japan episode is that the audience, you guys, are going to be able to poll and decide who the top expert is, and they will win $1,000 US, maybe cash, to the COVID-19 foundation of their choice. So without further ado, let's get right into trivia night. And thank you guys so much for joining. To the audience, really appreciate that. So let's go ahead and cover today's categories. So we have APAC strategy with Andrew, hurdles and threats with David, Kaizen mentality with Jonathan, and think outside the bento box with Eugene. All right, so let's start with APAC strategy with Andrew. So Andrew, what is the appropriate structure to set up an entity between a GK and a KK in Japan?
I would say it depends on the company, but yeah, the two entity structures that are most common are the GK, the Goto Kaisho, or the Kabushiki Kaisho, or KK. Traditionally, the KK was seen as sort of the more premier entity type. But over the last couple of decades, companies like Apple, Amazon, ExxonMobil have all formed GKs in Japan. And from a tax perspective, there's some advantages to a GK for a lot of companies. It's considered a pass-through entity in the US. There's also less compliance requirements, so less paperwork for companies. The only potential disadvantage is you can't list on the Tokyo Stock Exchange as GK, and there's some fundraising limitations with the GK. But for a lot of companies these days, the GK is kind of the more obvious choice.
Got it. Yeah, pretty straightforward. GK is the way to go. All right, next up, hurdles and threats. David, what are some of the common issues or grievances which companies should seek legal counsel in Japan?
Probably the most common legal issue companies would seek external legal counsel advice is in relation to their company formation and their corporate secretarial work that Andrew was mentioning. But if we focus on the grievance part, the risk management portion of your question, it's probably in the employee and labor issue area. Japan has the one area where Japan has an active plaintiffs bar, where you have attorneys who are willing to work on a contingency fee basis in litigations, is in the employment area. So if you're going to be involuntarily terminating any individuals, any of your employees or whatnot, you really have to do so with care, because in Japan, you don't have an absolute right to terminate your employees. Employees are very much aware of this. Most employees, when you try to counsel them out of the company, will leave, and you can do it without incident most of the time, but you are going to encounter those individuals where they chain themselves to the desk and they're not going to leave no matter what. And then you've got to work out some sort of severance. And if you've already, approached them in kind of a some semi-hostile manner to push them out of the company, they could get legal counsel and then come back and file litigation and file a grievance. And in the worst case scenario, you may be on the hook for several years of salary as a severance. And while you're litigating that, you're still being forced to pay salary in the meantime. The other area is probably with overtime pay. So Japan has a very limited exemption for managers. So the definition of manager is very narrow. They're the only ones who are not entitled to overtime, but even a title of manager will not necessarily make you a manager. So it's only those senior executives who fall outside of overtime.
Yeah, and one of the underlying themes, getting it right the first time in terms of hiring the right people for the right jobs, and then also being aware of all of these different laws and staying ahead of that. So thank you for that, David. Right, up next, Jonathan. Jonathan, looking at patent filings in Japan, the number of new patents has flatlined. What are some benefits and incentives in Japan to secure a patent for a new product?
Patent protection in Japan is generally a lot narrower and limited in scope than you'll find in the West. And so if you've got a product that is usually in a sort of category that's usually protected by a patent, and you don't have a patent, then it might be more difficult to secure a partner. But very broadly, you have to think about sort of what the purpose of your patent is. Is it defensive? Is it offensive? Is it plumage, just to make you look sort of sexy? Or is it for your own resume padding? And depending on that, you can have very, very different outcomes.
Very good. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so get those patents ready. Eugene, for startup tech companies going to market in Japan, is it better to take your product direct to the customer or develop partners who can resell through a distributor model?
Thanks, Jordan. It's obviously nuanced, but I guess at a high level, if I were to summarize, if you're hoping to enter the market with lower cost, which typically startups are cash strapped, and faster time to acquisition with less focus on quality of customer, then a partner model is probably best. That said, a lot of the cloud companies, their very model is to go direct to customer. So increasingly, we're seeing cloud companies go direct, both B2B and B2C. If I were to start up a company today, though, I'd probably do both. I would do direct to make sure that the first set of customers that we get are very high quality, recognizable names, and the implementations are very successful so that they can tell their colleagues, but also to continue to drive reach, marketing, education of customers. I would also embrace partners.
Right. Thanks so much, Eugene. So that is the end of round one. So congratulations. Good job, everyone. So now what we're going to do is try to drop a poll to the audience, and you guys get to decide which expert in round one had the most charisma. And we're going to give you guys 30 seconds for the vote. And we'll play a little bit of light music in the background. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, the name of this show, but I think we all know what it is. It's Jeopardy.
Jordan, you need a Canadian accent and a mustache.
It's a public performance.
All right. Well, let's share the results and see who won round one.
Whoa.
And Eugene takes home 100 points. All right, we're gonna truck right along to round two. And let me get this poll out of my face. So what are some, oh man, I can't see it. Okay, let me take it off. What are some common examples of work rules and employment laws that need to be considered in Japan?
So there's actually 10 required work rules in Japan. So those are to be implemented if you have 10 employees or more. We actually like our clients to do that if they're planning on doing it, just because it's easier to do it up front rather than after you've gone past the 10th employee. So just running through them, it's your work times and your leave requirements is one. Methods of determining and calculating your wages, your retirement allowances, matters regarding dismissal or resignation, meal expenses and expense policy, your extraordinary wages, safety and hygiene, job training, workers compensation, workers accident compensation, and then awards and disciplinary measures. Those are the 10 that are required. And again, that's for 10 employees or more, but we encourage people to do that earlier.
Yeah, no, really, really excellent nuts and bolts to have as you're starting or expanding in Japan. Okay, next up for David. Many cloud businesses have questions around PII data, that's personally identifiable information. Where does PII data need to be stored? Does it need to be in a local data residence through AWS, Azure, TCP, or should certain types of applications work with local companies?
Japan doesn't require that data be stored in Japan, and it doesn't necessarily prohibit data from being exported out of Japan or exported out of Japan to third parties. But increasingly over the last several years, and then again with the amendments to the data protection law this year, the regulatory burden on companies has really increased. So just generally, Japan has three different types of what personal data you can think of. It is ordinary personal data that we've all come to know and love, sensitive data, and then there's anonymized data. And so depending on what type of data you're talking about, depending on the identity of the third party, whether it's an independent third party that you have no other relationship with, whether it's an affiliate, whether it's a branch, whether it's a data processor working under your control and your instruction. And then depending on the country where it's located and the data protection laws of those country, the type of consent you may need to use, whether opt-in or opt-out, and then the amount of disclosure that you may have to make to individuals or affected individuals is going to vary significantly depending on all of those factors. So you really need to sit with counsel and map out the type of data that you're collecting, how it's classified, who the third party is, what exceptions apply, and then what sort of consent can you use to actually move or use the data, whether it can be opt-in or opt-out.
Yeah, definitely important to have good data custody, and can be quite a mess if you are having to go back and backtrack and look at where all the data is housed. And like you said, important to have good advisors, advising you from the onset. Okay, so let's head over to Jonathan. Jonathan, what company is operating? What can companies operating in Japan do to incubate groundbreaking inventions and products?
So this is an incredibly important question, but I think one that a lot of foreign companies just have a very tough time doing. But the answer is really simple. They've got to think about what the customers need, and their needs are not just technology, their social context and the psychology, and that applies not just to not just in the consumer space, but in the business to business space also. What's the context? How are people using it? And if companies think through that context, that's the best way to create something that's really groundbreaking. And that's where foreign companies have an advantage, because they can look at it in a very different way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very succinct and well said, Jonathan. Thank you. All right, and then the end of round two for 200 points. Eugene, how are pricing and packaging strategies in Japan different than other markets?
Yeah, so I think that Japan is a very unique market when it comes to SKUs and pricing models. If you look at the history of US-based companies entering Japan, the ones that have been most successful are the ones that really customize their SKUs. So quick statistic for you, in the United States, Coca-Cola company produces 22 soft drink beverages, okay? In Japan, there's 147. So Coca-Cola, my favorite non-Coke Coke would be like a cherry Coke or a Diet Coke. And of course, Japan has all of those, but you also have Katekin Coke and Fiber Coke and all of these different SKUs, and they're very well received in the market. So when you translate that, into, hey, how do I think about SKUing? It's very easy to get tempted to take a global SKU into Japan and praying or wishing that that'll be successful. But it is a unique enough market that you really need to think hard. And it's a big enough market that you need to think about, doing some engineering work that's appropriate for the Japan market. Pricing, increasingly with the cloud, there's global pricing arbitrage, so it's becoming less of an issue. But historically, again, if you are starting a new category, you may want to price it a little bit differently, or you may want to package it differently with services so that customers can more easily implement it, given that the skills for that kind of a product may not exist in market yet. So SKUs and pricing, I wouldn't necessarily try to transplant a global model. I would really think hard about what the customers want and figure out a way to deliver on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great answer, Eugene. And that rounds out the second round. So I'm going to drop the second round poll here. Which expert answer is the most relevant to your business today? And we'll take 30 seconds to think about that. All right, guys, it looks like we got our votes in. Whoops. Let's share the results. And it looks like Eugene took round two as well. Congratulations, Eugene.
I think it's more the questions, maybe not the answers, Jordan.
Sure. Well, they were all really good answers, but let's just do a quick score check. So looks like Eugene right now is the owner of the points with 300. And then we have Andrew, David, and Jonathan still trying to get on the board. So let's head over to round 3 for 300 points. As WFH policy, that's work from home policy, shifts from a nice to have to a must have, how does that impact labor law in Japan?
So I point back to the work rules that I rattled off before, and I take a close look at a few of those. The first thing is I'd make sure that my work rules indicate that employees are going to be working from home, or that there's going to be some sort of hybrid model. The other thing that I would do is make sure that it's clear that the working hours are indicated there. With the work from home environment, work times can change, and part of the work rule requirements is that those times are stipulated in your work rules. And then last but not least, I would also inquire with my workers' compensation insurance to make sure that there's no impact on a work from home environment.
Fantastic.
Jordan, can I throw something on top of that?
Yeah.
Going back to the first answer I had regarding overtime pay, Japanese companies are required to track and keep a record of their employee working hours. So typically in the office, they come in and they check in and they check out, and you have to have a record of every employee's working hours every single day. And that's for also calculation of overtime purposes. So if the labor inspector comes to your company for some sort of compliance inspection, the first thing they're going to ask for is your record of working hours. And a lot of foreign companies don't really think anything about it because there just are work requirements in the US where people come and go and work from Starbucks and do different things. But in Japan, you do need to track that. And if people are working beyond the hours, you then have to mandatorily pay overtime. So it's something also then that gets a little bit lost in the shuffle when people are working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's definitely a lot of time to think about a different way to track that, and I'm sure someone will come up with something that that can answer that question.
Actually, there are some structures that can do that. You can sort of build in overtime to the basic employee equation, and that can actually work pretty well to protect employers, and at the same time get a general agreement with employees about how much overtime they're going to work. It has to be built into the work rules, but it can work very well.
Sure. Very good. Thank you, all of you guys. Next question. Again, 300 points on the line. How does Japan protect sensitive information under the current data protection laws?
Yeah, Japan has a category of data, so they refer to as sensitive information, and it includes things such as race, creed, religion, physical or mental disabilities, medical records, medical and pharmacological treatments that the person may have taken, whether they've ever been arrested or detained from criminal proceedings, and whether they're a victim of a crime. So these are all different types of sensitive information. And then on top of that, Japan, though they have one national law, they also have sectoral guidelines that, let's say, will apply to the financial industry, the medical industry, the labor department has, labor ministry has theirs, and then there's various other guidelines and whatnot for particular industries, and they may have additional categories as well. So under the reforms that went into effect this year, in principle, so kind of in a Japanese sort of way, not entirely clear, in principle, companies should only use opt-in consent to collect sensitive information, but it's not absolutely mandatory. But they do, within the law and then inside the guidelines, require that you should only be processing and using sensitive information if it's strictly or absolutely necessary for the product or service that you're going to be providing the person. So you shouldn't be collecting this information and then using it in some sort of nefarious way or in a way that's really not directly related to the product or service that you're giving them. But then what is clear under the law is that if you're going to transfer it to a third party, you do need to get opt-in consent. So that would require a full disclosure of what sensitive information you're going to be disclosing, who it's going to go to, and then how that person is going to use it. So there is a higher bar for collection and use of sensitive data.
Right, absolutely. And as you said, it seems like anonymized data is one way to go, or scrubbing that data in a way that's compliant. And also just really good to break down the sensitive information categories, because you need to have it broken down before you can control it, right?
Right. Yeah, if you're an insurance company, you may need to collect information on medical treatments the person has had in the past, whether they have any disabilities, but that you should only be using that, let's say, then you're going to be offering them some sort of insurance policy. You know, a bank collecting that same information and then using it for, let's say, a whole mortgage or something, then it may be a little bit questionable.
Sure. Right on. Thank you. Appreciate that, David. So let's go over to Jonathan. So Jonathan, what are some common product attributes that should be augmented to satisfy the Japan market?
So before I answer, I just thought I'd add a bit of fire to spice up this competition. Yeah, so the common attributes really, the thing that I think a lot of foreign companies entering Japan don't pay enough attention to is Japanese demand for fantastic service. And it's really critical and surprising in a way to a lot of foreign companies to figure out what Japanese actually think the service component should include. And so that would be my sort of primary advice is to just have companies think about their product holistically, not just the technical attributes, but how they service customers and what their customers really want and need in terms of that service.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for spicing it up, Jonathan. I don't think you get any more caliente in here. Eugene, what are some common mistakes which companies typically make upon first entering Japan?
Yeah, so I will obviously riff on the prior answer. Making sure that the product is appropriate for the market is super important. You know, companies like eBay don't really have a presence in Japan, and there are many other examples where they didn't quite localize the product in a way that it was appealing to the Japanese consumer. So I think there are it's again very attractive to take shortcuts and bring in a global product into the market, but if you don't have that right, I wouldn't expect too many results. I think Jonathan's point is absolutely right on. It's not just the product experience. The CEO of my former employer basically said, look, we have to set the global standard in terms of quality of engagement with customers at the level of Japan. If we can satisfy that, then we'll be successful globally. And that's so true. Whether business or consumer, the customer's expectation for service and quality will be the highest in Japan. Right? So I think it's very important to make sure that it's delivered on. The last thing that I often see is U.S. headquarters are very impatient. They typically invest from $5 to $10 million to start up a subsidiary in Japan, and they want payback, they want returns. And so, there's a lot of pressure from headquarters to the subsidiary on driving revenue, as they should. But Japan's a little bit slower to tip. So managing and controlling corporates' expectations around sort of the revenue curve and educating them is super important. It's a fast follower market, and once the tipping point comes, Japan will be a very lucrative and big business, but it just takes a little bit longer to get there. And so I think that internal dialogue and communication is super, super important.
Yes. Thank you, Eugene. And that is the name of my favorite Guns N' Roses song, Patience. That's all we need. So going back to Andrew, prior to making a first critical hire, what are some common misconceptions companies have often related to the Japanese candidate pool?
Well, I'll reframe this. So I think that one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make, and having spent 6 years in Japan and been through the hiring process numerous times, I think it's easy to do because you get caught up in looking at the candidate's language skills, and it sounds really rudimentary, but certainly communication with HQ or with management should be part of the criteria, but oftentimes it leads to that being way too high on the priority list, and if it can set you back months, years, or take you out of the market completely if you're hiring a country manager and you don't get it right. So focus on how well they know the product, how well they know the ecosystem, and not on their language skills. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's obviously a very important thing in terms of what we see at HCCR, and I think you nailed it there. So I just realized I skipped over the round 3 poll. So I'm going to go back and send that one out. So far to the audience, if you guys are still there and you're still listening, thank you for staying tuned in. Which expert answer in round 3 was the most thoughtful?
Don't you mean fiery?
What's that?
Don't you mean fiery, the most fiery?
Which one was the most thoughtful and fiery?
That's not fair. You've changed the criteria.
This will be a controversy that is disputed for months to come. Okay, we have a few more votes coming in. And let's end it there and share the results. And Jonathan, it looks like the fire did the trick. So Jonathan takes home 300 points, and now we are in a deadlock between Jonathan and Eugene, and David and Andrew still on the schneid. So back into David. With people working from home, there might be some confusion as to whether employee inventions are made using corporate resources or personal resources. How does this affect the ownership of intellectual property?
Right. With technology available today, companies can control how their, let's say, their confidential information or their trade secret or their software code can be used and accessed and copied and whatnot, and they can create logs of them. So for example, if you're developing in GitHub, you can see who's coming in and who's taking things out. And there are ways to manage your employees, but still, if you're going to have employees at home for long hours, they are going to be maybe working on their own side businesses, particularly in high tech, guys, gals in their 20s and 30s, also having a company they're trying to get off the ground. And maybe they're borrowing ideas from the source code that they're working on for you, or implementing code or whatnot and moving it over to their own platform. So there is a bit of a risk that employees, whether unintentionally or thinking that it's not such a big deal, may move things over to their own platform or develop things that they like and then decide to keep. So in Japan, without going into too much detail, whether something is owned, whether an invention is owned by the employer or the employee, there's a number of factors that a court would look at, such as whether the employer's resources are being used, whether the invention is something that's typically within the scope of what the employee's work is at the company, whether it was created during work hours and whatnot. And so really almost from the get-go, the presumption is in favor of the employer. And if some of these other factors come into play, then that presumption only gets higher. So I think companies have to be aware that there may be some leakage of their trade secrets or confidential information to employees. Customer list might be another thing beyond source code that somebody might capitalize and want to use in their own business. So there is going to be a little bit of a mixing of resources for sure.
Sure, and definitely important. Does anybody else have another point? I think I might have heard some feedback, or maybe that's just me. But it's very important to really have the right infrastructure to make sure that everything is being done in a compliant way, and that everything is transparent. So a lot of software companies are going to have opportunities, and this is a topic that I know is going to be talked about for a long time. So thank you for those nuts and bolts, David. All right, so we're moving right along to Jonathan. Kaizen mentality, what are some of the most commonly encountered barriers to digitization by Japanese companies?
So the easy answer, the short answer of this is resistance to change. But then when you think about what is that, some things sort of slide through the market and move very quickly, and others don't. And I think the key is the social context that I mentioned earlier. You can't assume that something is going to be adopted just because it's technically superior. You have to think about how people are using it today and how it makes them feel and how it makes them look in a social context. And that's very, very true in Japan, and particularly true of these sort of digitalization and various technology applications. People can be either very afraid because of what their friends would say, or very quickly adopting. So I think doing quick tests, sort of mini market tests can indicate that, but ultimately there's a fair bit of risk around it.
Sure. Yeah, good one, Jonathan. And that's one of the things that I love about the Japan market is that the technology often reigns supreme, but there are also a lot of complexities to navigating around that. So that's why you would want an advisor to help you navigate some of that complexity. All right, last question in the quickfire rounds. Eugene, what is the appropriate organizational structure for the Japan market, direct, matrix, or other?
Yeah, I'm finding, I've done a bunch of research on this for my clients because they all ask this question. And generally, the trend for global companies is to go more functional. That said, if you think about Japan culturally, things like hierarchy, consensus-driven decision-making culture, collaboration and cohesion, and the importance of that, if you typically hire a Japanese country manager, a solid line model is what they will prefer. What I've seen is legal, HR, and finance almost always solid line into corporate for compliance reasons. But you can have both. It really depends. The one thing that you'll want to think about is if you do a functional model where the organization is matrixed, obviously sales will roll into the local leadership. But for every other function, whether it's services, marketing, support, these Japanese employees will not only have to have functional expertise, but also English. And given the competition for talent in Japan, hiring those folks is extremely challenging, or replacing them is tough. Unless you're working with HCCR, of course. But so those are some considerations that you'll want to think about.
Yeah.
For me, I think it works for both. Either model works, but you just have to be really aware of the pros and cons as you operate the company in the context of a Japanese setting. Sure.
Yeah, and hands down, I've seen a lot of companies enter with a heavy investment on customer service in a number of different functions. So, therein lies the rub. Somebody that has those language ability as well as the specialized functional ability, and it sounds like going the traditional route also mirrors some of the clients that you might be working with. And that was another question that we didn't have time to ask, but
some clients, they're unicorn companies, have bucked the global model and gone with a unique model for Japan for this very reason. So companies do make exceptions, understanding that this is a very unique market.
I think if you're looking at more of the collaborative approach, and you're early enough in that sort of decision-making process, you should include that in your hiring considerations, right? So making sure that that's part of the interview process, that the leadership that you're looking at is comfortable working in that environment, and get their sort of thoughts before you go ahead and move forward.
Fantastic, guys.
That's a great point.
All right, so that does it for the quick fire round, and great job to everyone on the panel. So here we are. Quick time check. We have about 6 minutes left. So I'm gonna launch the poll. For round 4, which expert gave the most succinct answer there? Just have it on repeat. 10 seconds. All right, and we'll end the poll there. And let's share the results. It looks like Eugene has taken it home with round 4. All right, so Eugene has now taken 400 points. That puts him in the lead with 700 points. In second place, we have Jonathan, and David and Andrew still trying to buck the trend and get some points on the board, but they'll have a chance here in the Q&A section. So let's head over to the questions. I haven't looked at them, but all right, so no questions from the audience yet. If anybody has some questions, please pop them into the Q&A box. We have about 5 minutes to answer questions.
I'm betting it all.
Yeah, otherwise, I think
Betting it all.
Eugene is, otherwise Eugene is going to run away with this one.
I'm just curious, how many backgrounds does Jonathan have in his background folder?
Well, we haven't exhausted them all.
I think it's for that.
All right, guys. Well, if we don't have any additional questions, I guess maybe we could just open up the next 5 minutes to the panel and just do kind of a roundtable with some closing thoughts.
Jordan,
So,
we get a
Andrew,
couple of questions that came in.
we do.
Oh, yeah, this came in right now.
Oh, okay. Here we go. So from let's just call it Kim K. Bronstein. What do you anticipate being the biggest challenge in navigating business in the post-COVID world, where businesses need to pivot? And that goes to Andrew first.
Okay. We're all experiencing this real time, right? So adjusting to the work from home environment, adjusting to how you access your customers. I know in my line of work, I think 2 weeks ago I was in 10 Zoom meetings in a single day. I was kind of zoomed out. Whereas traditionally, I would meet new clients through networking events and things like that. So just, pivoting into how you're accessing new customers, how you're engaging with your customers is a big part. And then how you're managing your employee base. I think those are the two biggest challenges our company is facing. And then the other is just business continuity. How do you keep doing what you're doing and making sure you have robust plans in place? So, across our network, we've employed different models, hybrid models, work from home models. Our entire shared service platform in Malaysia was work from home for the better part of 60 days. So, there's a lot of challenges. I think I named, the three biggest ones that our company.
Sure. Yeah, definitely challenging times, Andrew. Does anybody else want to chime in there?
Yeah, I think one of the really big challenges is evaluating, is just all around employee management, evaluating, training, and managing, onboarding and of new employees, because we're very, very focused and used to, as a society, to dealing with in-person interviews, in-person training, and all of these, and then creating some kind of metric around these is very hard and very difficult for people to accept, but at the same time incredibly important. And equaling, in a way, it has a sort of democratizing effect around the world, because now people are competing on a more consistent basis in some ways.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, appreciate that, guys. Yeah, it's definitely, I think that question cuts to the core of this, and that's why we're all here. And I think that it does take, as I mentioned at the top of the show, collective effort, more sharing of information. And my point of view is what a great opportunity we all have, whether you're at any level of an organization, to help other people who might be looking for their next opportunity or looking to do something new and just try to disrupt trends and old ways of doing things and drive initiatives forward. So do we have time for one more question? Do you guys want to do one more?
Sure.
All right, let me go back. Okay. Do any of you guys see material changes in investment plans for the Japan market from global companies due to COVID-19?
Yes, unfortunately. I speak to venture capitalists, private equity firms, and startups on a regular basis, and almost exclusively, they're deferring either entering Japan or investing in Japan until there's clarity around this COVID situation. My next thought was, well, then are you doubling down on English-speaking markets, whether it's the UK, Australia, and New Zealand? And that doesn't seem to be the case at all. Mature companies seem to be doubling down more on the United States if they're based here, because it is a big market and it's home turf. What I'm finding with startups is they're investing in engineering. So they're not investing in any go-to-market resources. And again, I'm generalizing, but I'd say eight companies out of 10 are really investing in engineering and product so that when we come out of this, their products are differentiated and more competitive. So they're really trying to protect their engineering nest egg through this storm. So a little bit different behavior between big and small companies. Japan, it's a slower moving market, so it seems like they've clamped down. I'm hoping by 2021, things will start moving again and we'll invest in Japan.
I also think it depends on the industry. So anything that makes the internet faster, safer, products like educational technology, or even fintech for that matter, are industries that are still moving forward, and actually some are not necessarily benefiting, but are not being put off by the COVID environment. And so there are spurts of growth in different industries. So in a place like Japan, where you are seeing a more of an adoption of digitalization, there is some opportunity there, and we are seeing businesses move forward. Japan for us is continues to be one of our top markets and where we're seeing some growth opportunity. But I think across the board, to Eugene's point, it doesn't matter if it's Japan, the UK, Australia, or anywhere. There's a number of barriers in place, and people are putting off plans for sort of larger operations, until there's kind of a clear path ahead.
Yeah, just to throw some more numbers out there. Again, just conversations I've had with VCs. 80% of companies are figuring out ways to repivot in this new COVID environment. 10% of the companies are actually experiencing a lift from this environment. Obviously companies like Zoom have done really well, and 10% of the companies won't make it. So just to give you kind of a demographic of startups, it's 80, 10, 10.
Yeah. David, I'll give you last licks on this question, and then we're out of time, but I want to give you a crack at taking home this round, and then we'll send out a poll and take it home.
In which question? To the material changes in investment plans?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, for me, most of my work is inbound out of Japan into the US. So representing Japanese companies, typically strategics, coming into the US. And I find them still to be rather active. I mean, they need to grow. They're really hamstrung because no one can travel. So they're all stuck in Japan. They can't get out. And so plans, it's slowed definitely in terms of doing deals, but they're still looking, and they know they need to get back into the game, and they need to keep growing, expanding internationally. So, but yeah, things are slow from Japan, but lots of other things going on.
All right, guys. Well, that just about does it. Does anybody else have an additional point? All right, that just about does it. And congratulations to Eugene. Eugene took it home with 700 points. Congratulations again. Where do you think you'll spend that $1,000 to COVID charity? Do you have one picked out yet?
Yeah, there's a very famous research center here in Seattle called the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, and they're doing a lot of corona virus research right now. So that would be the organization with everybody's support. That would be the organization, this to go to.
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, that's great. And, we'll publish that out as well, so that if other people want to contribute there, they can. And guys, thank you so much again for your time and joining. That wraps it up for the Social Dignity Webcast, episode 1, Best Practices in Doing Business in Japan. Great job, everybody. I'm Jordan Bronstein.